As part of the health challenge, you will need to communicate effectively both with your group and with your target audience in your final presentation. These skills will be vital throughout your course and future career. Effective communication. Top 10 tips. Why is effective communication important? To educate. In order to create behavioural or attitude change, the communication must educate the target audience with clear messages about the implications, impact and reasoning behind the outcomes. To persuade. Sometimes health messages are unpopular and not what people want to hear. A good example of this might be around obesity and diet. Effective health communication sometimes needs to persuade people before it can educate them. To gain trust and credibility. If the area is under-researched, then effective communication of a new concept, theory or result may be a huge step in increasing the credibility of the healthcare professional themselves or the area of research. To gain funding. Perhaps some initial research has been undertaken and has found that a particular area is going to be fruitful. Perhaps a theory has been tested with promising results, but more money is needed to further the research. Communicating the outcomes and potential impact will be vital to secure funds. To dispel myths. There are many misconceptions and myths around health that are mentioned every day, many of them because they sound sensational or because of miscommunication. To clarify our understanding and thinking. When we are forced to communicate in an effective way, it makes us consider our messages and facts, consider the content of what we say and the words we use, and consider the best way to get that message out. In doing this, we can sometimes deepen our learning on a topic and clarify our thoughts. Here are 10 tips for effective communication. The content of our communication, the way we deliver it, and our actions all have different impacts. In actual fact, the very content of what we say has the least impact, and this could be to do with the fact that people, on average, only hear about 20 to 25% of what is said to them. Our tone of voice, accent, and emotions all travel through our vocalizations, and this has the second most impact. From this, people will get a sense of whether our message is positive and exciting, or grave and serious. What we actually do, so our actions and how we look, have the biggest impact of all. Demonstrations work well to achieve big impact, particularly if they are backing up whatever we're saying. Know and understand your audience. What you say and how you say it and what you do will all vary depending on your chosen audience. There are important communication principles to follow for all of these. But always think to yourself whether what you're saying is appropriate for the audience. Is it accessible? So will they understand it? Will they want to understand it? And are you being convincing? You might need to put forward compelling arguments. Also, there is no such thing as the general public. In fact, there are actually a lot of different publics. Try aiming your communication at a subset of people. For example, people with an interest in healthcare or a particular political ideal. This will make structuring your message easier and more focused than trying to please everyone. Understand the different modes of communication that exist and where these are best deployed. Different communication methods will have a different focus and will make it either easier or more difficult to convey particular types of information. Face-to-face communication, posters, videos, podcasts, social media, and physical artifacts will all have different impacts on the audience that receives them, and it's important for you to consider who you are presenting the information to and how likely they are to be receptive to the method or medium you have chosen. Once again, it's important to know your audience. Who are they? What communication methods are they already familiar with, and which ones are they most comfortable with using? How do you want them to respond to the information you are giving them, and what then do you want them to do with it? Think about the language you're using. Using non-specialist language is important to make sure your message can be understood by all audiences. You need to be aware of the level of exposure people will have had to healthcare messages and language. Much of their knowledge might come from television programs, social media, or newspaper and magazines, so it's important to think about what all of these have in common in terms of communicating in an accessible way. There also may be some naivety amongst groups around the scope and possibilities within healthcare provision, and managing the expectations of this audience will be key. Understand your audience's motivations. We mentioned before that effective communication can lead to funding or furthering research, and when you're dealing with influential people, for example policymakers, then you need to be able to persuade them and understand their motivations. If you try and lobby without thought of what the vested interests are of the people you're talking to, then you might come up against a brick wall. This demonstrates the importance of good research and understanding of the broader topic and its impact. Find common interests with your audience. Make your communication relevant to the people who are watching, listening to, or reading your information. Empathy works both ways. Even though you need to remain professional throughout, still consider whether there are ways you can make connections with your audience. You may well find them more receptive to what you are saying. Finding out what interests your audience will help you make decisions about what information to include or leave out, and how to distill your message effectively. Be accurate and factually correct. Communication can often be about debunking myths or correcting misconceptions which may occur because of sensationalist news, TV programs, dodgy journalism, and misunderstanding of information. That's why it's so important to ensure that when communicating with large audiences, the facts are right. You will also need to manage and prepare for the fact that people come with all sorts of prejudices and misconceptions. If you're not confident in your facts, then how can you defend or justify what you're saying? Distill information. In order to present the most salient points within the constraints of your medium, you need to understand the limitations and potentials of that medium. How long do you have? How many words? How big a poster? How many minutes? Being able to distill information involves being fully familiar with your material and an ability to critically analyze it so you can pick out what is most important. Whatever the constraints, you will need to ask yourself what are the key points you need your audience to take away. If you removed some of the information, would what remains still make sense? Would it still be enough to act upon? Think about your audience's minimum information requirements and build-up. It's far more effective to present less information well than to include so much detail in a small space that your messages become confused. Know how to deal with negative perceptions of medical research or healthcare messages. As we've already mentioned, your audience may have misconceptions about medical research or healthcare, whether based on exposure to certain media, naivety, or lack of knowledge, or even as a result of past experiences engaging with health professionals. These could all present barriers to your audience being receptive to your communications. For example, it could make them more critical of the information you are presenting, and more prone to disbelief or mistrust. You need to think carefully about the language you choose, the way you present the facts, and demonstrate a real appreciation of your audience's needs and motivations. Remain professional. When presenting potentially contentious or sensitive or delicate information, it is important not to get emotionally involved, either in the material you are presenting or in your audience's response. Maintain empathy and understanding towards your audience, but keep in mind that they will need to continue to trust in your professional status, regardless of what you need to communicate to them. This is another situation where knowing and understanding your audience is key. Consider the information you are conveying as one of the steps towards solving a problem. What can your audience do with the information you are giving them? In gathering and communicating your information, are you able to develop some recommendations, suggestions, or advice on how they can respond positively to information that may be difficult for them to swallow? Communicate objectively and without emotional bias towards or against what you are presenting. Being able to do this effectively will be helped if you have conducted adequate research, are prepared, and have all the relevant facts to hand. These tips were devised by the 301 Student Skills Centre and University of Sheffield Enterprise.